Kyle Martinez sat in his office on Earth, staring at the strange message that had arrived that morning. The words were written in perfect English, but they came from somewhere far beyond Earth. The Galactic Council wanted humans to join something. Called the War Games for the first time ever, Kyle had been Earth's ambassador to alien species for 3 years now. He had met creatures with 4 arms, beings made of living crystal, and fish-like aliens who breathed water instead of air. But this invitation was different. This was about war, and everyone knew humans were new to space travel. The message was formal and polite, but Kyle could read between the lines. The aliens expected humans to lose badly. They wanted to show the new species from Earth exactly where they belonged in the galaxy. At the bottom of the list, Kyle picked up his phone and called Captain Lisa Rodriguez. She commanded the U.E.'s Freedom, one of Earth's newest spaceships. It wasn't much compared to alien vessels, but it was the best humanity had to offer. "Captain Rodriguez here," came the crisp voice through the speaker. "Lisa, we just got invited to play war games with the aliens," Kyle said. "They want us to bring a ship and crew." There was a long pause. "Are you serious? They want us to fight against species that have been traveling between stars for hundreds of years?" "That's exactly what they want," Kyle replied. "The question is, are you up for it?" Lisa laughed. "Are you kidding? My crew has been stuck doing boring patrol missions for months. They would love a chance to show off what humans can do." 2 weeks later, the U.E.'s Freedom was traveling through space toward a place called Nexus Prime. The ship was small compared to the massive alien vessels they passed along the way. Some of the alien ships were as big as cities. Others looked like they were made of pure light. The human ship looked like a tiny metal box next to them. On board the Freedom, Captain Rodriguez was meeting with her senior officers. Lieutenant Commander Jake Peterson sat at the table, grinning as always. He was in charge of explosives and had a talent for finding creative ways to blow things up. Chief Communications Officer Maria Santos was there too. She had learned to speak several alien languages and somehow made friends wherever she went. "So," Lisa said, looking around the table, "we're about to compete against the best military minds in the galaxy. Any ideas on how we don't embarrass ourselves completely?" Jake leaned back in his chair. "Well, we could always try doing what they don't expect." "Which is what exactly?" asked Maria. "I don't know yet," Jake admitted. "But I bet none of these aliens have ever seen a human barbecue." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You want to have a cookout during a war game? Why not? When's the last time anyone expected that in a military exercise?" Captain Rodriguez thought about it. The aliens probably had detailed files on human military tactics from Earth's history. They would know about human strategies from past wars, but they might not know about the things that made humans different from other species. Things like humor, friendship, and the ability to turn almost anything into a party. "Keep thinking along those lines," she told Jake. "We can't beat them with superior technology or centuries of experience, but maybe we can surprise them." The U.E.S. Freedom arrived at Nexus Prime 3 days before the games were supposed to start. The space station was huge, bigger than any structure humans had ever built. Ships from dozens of different species were docked around it. Some looked like giant insects. Others were perfectly smooth spheres. A few seemed to be made of living wood. The human ship found a small docking bay that seemed designed for vessels much larger than theirs. As they connected to the station, Lisa could see alien beings through the windows. Most of them were staring at the human ship with what looked like curiosity mixed with amusement. The opening ceremony took place in a massive hall that could hold thousands of beings. Representatives from 17 different species attended. Lisa and her officers sat in a section marked for new participants. The chairs were too big for humans, and their feet didn't touch the floor. Admiral Vexver took the stage. He was an Eltarian, which meant he looked somewhat like a human, except for the 4 eyes on stalks that moved independently of each other. He wore a uniform covered in medals and decorations that probably represented victories in battles across the galaxy. "Welcome, warriors of the Galactic Council," Admiral Vexver began. His voice was translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. For 300 years, these games have tested the finest military minds our species can produce. We gather, not to wage war, but to perfect the art of strategy and tactics. Jake leaned over to Maria and whispered, "Is it just me, or does he look like he's trying really hard not to look at us?" Maria glanced around the hall. Most of the alien representatives were paying attention to the Admiral, but she noticed a few stealing glances at the human section. "They're curious about us," she whispered back, "probably wondering what we're doing here." Admiral Vexvar continued his speech. "This year, we welcome a new species to our games. The humans of Earth have recently joined the galactic community. While their military traditions are ... limited, we believe this will be an educational experience for all involved." The way he said educational made it clear what kind of education he had in mind. The humans were here to learn their place, and that place was at the bottom dot. After the ceremony, there was a reception where all the species could meet each other. Lisa and her crew found themselves surrounded by curious aliens. Most were polite but distant. A few seemed genuinely interested in learning about humans. A being that looked like a walking tree introduced itself as Captain Valtar of the Corvan Hegemony. "Your species is very young," it said in a voice like wind through leaves. "Tell me, what experience do humans have with warfare?" Jake stepped forward with his usual grin. "Well, we've been fighting each other for most of our history." "Does that count?" The tree captain's branches rustled in what might have been laughter. "Fighting your own species is different from fighting others. In these games, you will face challenges your people have never imagined. That's what makes it fun," Jake replied. "Where's the excitement in doing something you already know how to do?" Maria was talking to a group of smaller aliens who looked like they were made of living metal. They were asking about human communication methods. "Your languages are very complex," one of them said. "How do you coordinate military actions with so many different ways of speaking?" "We practice a lot," Maria answered. "And we tell jokes. Humor helps people work together." The metal beings looked confused. "Jokes? During military operations?" "Especially during military operations," Maria said. "When things get serious, that's when you need to laugh the most." As the evening went on, Lisa realized something important. The aliens were all very serious about warfare. They treated it like a science, with precise rules and procedures. They studied tactics the way humans might study mathematics. But they seemed to have forgotten that war was ultimately about people, and people were unpredictable. Back on the Freedom that night, Lisa called her senior staff together. "I've been thinking about what Jake said earlier, about doing what they don't expect." And Maria asked, "These aliens have turned warfare into an art form. They have rules and traditions and proper ways of doing things. They probably have detailed plans for every possible scenario, except the scenarios they can't imagine," Jake said, catching on. "Exactly. They're expecting us to play by their rules. What if we don't?" Lieutenant Amy Foster, who had been quiet during the reception, spoke up. "You mean like make up our own rules?" "Not make up new rules," Lisa said. "Just ... approach the whole thing differently. They see war games as a test of military skill. What if we see them as something else entirely?" Jake's grin got wider. "Like a party that happens to involve explosions?" "Something like that," Lisa agreed. "The first scenario. Tomorrow is a planetary invasion. Standard military exercise. But what if we don't treat it like a military exercise? Maria was already starting to smile. What if we treat it like we're planning the galaxy's biggest barbecue? Now you're thinking, Lisa said. They want to see what humans can do in a military situation. Let's show them what humans can do, period. The next morning, as alien fleets prepared for the first war game, with careful precision and centuries of tactical knowledge, the crew of the UES Freedom was busy with very different preparations. Jake was checking his special supplies and grinning like he had the best secret in the galaxy. Maria was practicing her alien language skills and thinking about how to make friends with people who were supposed to be her enemies. And Captain Lisa Rodriguez was wondering if she was about to make history or make the biggest fool of herself in galactic history. Either way, it was going to be interesting. The first war game began at exactly 0800 hours Galactic Standard Time. All 17 species received the same mission briefing: invade and secure the simulated planet below. The planet had cities, military bases, and civilian populations. Standard rules applied: capture the command centers, minimize civilian casualties, establish control. Admiral Lexfer watched from the command station as the different fleets moved into position. The Corvin ships formed their traditional battle lines. The Zephyrian vessels began their textbook orbital bombardment patterns. The crystal beings from Nexus deployed their energy shields in perfect geometric formations. Then there was the human. Ship.the U.S. Freedom was flying in what appeared to be random circles around the planet. The Admiral's 4 eyes focused on the tactical display, trying to understand the human strategy. Were they scanning for weaknesses? Looking for the best landing site? Planning some kind of surprise attack? Admiral, his communications officer, said, "We're receiving a strange transmission from the human vessel." "Put it on screen," Admiral Lexfer ordered. The main display showed Lieutenant Amy Foster standing in what looked like the human ship's cafeteria. She was wearing a chef's hat and holding a spatula. Behind her, several other humans were setting up what appeared to be cooking equipment. "Greetings to all our new friends participating in today's exercise," Amy said cheerfully. "We're hosting a special event down on the planet's surface. It's called a barbecue, and everyone is invited. We'll be serving authentic Earth burgers, which are guaranteed to be unlike anything you've ever tasted." Admiral Lexfer's eye stalks twisted in confusion. What is a barbecue? His tactical officer, a being with 6 arms and blue skin, was equally puzzled. "It appears to be some kind of food preparation ritual, sir." On the screen, Amy continued her presentation. "Now, we know you're all busy with your military exercises, but we promise this will be worth your time. We've got beef, chicken, and even some plant-based options for our vegetarian friends. Plus, we're introducing a brand new concept called fun to military operations." Down on the planet's surface, the simulated civilian population was receiving the same broadcast. The computer-generated people were programmed to react like real civilians during a military invasion. They were supposed to be scared, confused, and seeking shelter. Instead, they were curious. Did she say free food? One simulated civilian asked. Another, "I think so. And what's a burger?" Within minutes, small groups of computer-generated civilians were making their way toward the coordinates Amy had broadcast. They had never heard of a barbecue before, but free food was free food. Meanwhile, Sergeant Danny Clark and his squad were already on the planet's surface. They had landed quietly while everyone was distracted by Amy's cooking show. Danny was carrying what looked like a large bag of party decorations, colorful balloons, streamers, and other festive supplies. "Remember," Danny told his team, "we're not soldiers today. We're party planners." The team split up and began placing decorations around the planet's 3 main command centers. The balloons were tied to lampposts, benches, and anything else that looked like it needed brightening up. The streamers were hung between buildings. Everything looked very festive and completely harmless. Of course, the balloons weren't really balloons. They were explosive devices designed to look like party decorations. Jake Peterson had spent weeks perfecting them. They would explode when activated, but until then, they looked like the most innocent things in the galaxy. Back in space, the other fleets were trying to figure out what the humans were doing. The Corvin commander, Captain Veltar, was studying the situation with growing confusion. They appear to be celebrating, his tactical officer reported. Celebrating what? Captain Veltar asked. I'm not sure, sir. The invasion? Down on the planet, Amy's barbecue was attracting more attention than anyone expected. The smell of cooking meat was drifting across the simulated city. Even the computer-generated civilians, who weren't programmed to be curious about food, were starting to wander over to see what was happening. The alien landing parties were having trouble with their missions. Instead of cowering in fear, the civilians kept asking them about the barbecue. Excuse me? A simulated civilian said to a Zephyrian soldier. Do you know if they have vegetarian options at that party? The soldier looked confused. Party? This is a military invasion. You should be seeking shelter. But the nice lady said everyone was invited, the civilian replied. And it smells really good. Similar conversations were happening all over the planet. The Corvin forces were trying to secure a military base, but the computer-generated soldiers kept asking about burger recipes instead of fighting. Maria Santos was monitoring all the communications channels from the UES Freedom. She could hear the growing confusion in the alien commanders' voices as their carefully planned invasion turned into something completely different. Captain Rodriguez, she reported, I'm picking up chatter from multiple fleets. They can't figure out what we're doing. Good, Lisa replied. How's Amy doing with the barbecue? She's got about 300 simulated civilians and at least 50 actual alien soldiers lined up for food. I think some of the Corvin troops abandoned their posts to come try a burger. Jake Peterson was in the ship's engineering section, monitoring his special balloon decorations. The party decorations are in place around all 3 command centers, he reported, ready to activate on your signal. Not yet, Lisa said. Let's see how far we can push this. On the planet's surface, Amy's barbecue had become the most popular location on the entire world. Aliens from different species were trying human food for the first time. Some loved it. Others were confused by the concept of meat cooked over an open flame. All of them were completely distracted from their military objectives. A group of Altarian soldiers approached Amy's cooking station. Their eye stalks were swiveling around, taking in all the strange sights and smells. Human, their commander said, What is the tactical purpose of this barbecue? Amy smiled and handed him a burger. The tactical purpose is to have a good time. Try this. It's got cheese on it. The Altarian commander looked at the strange food item suspiciously. This is not standard military procedure. That's what makes it interesting, Amy replied. When's the last time you did something just because it was fun? The commander's eye stalks twisted as he considered this question. In 300 years of military exercises, no one had ever asked him that. Meanwhile, Maria Santos had been busy with her own part of the plan. She had been monitoring the communications between alien commanders and had noticed something interesting. The Altarian and Corvin forces were positioned on opposite sides of the planet, but they were both trying to capture the same command center. Hey, Captain Rodriguez, Maria called out. I've got an idea. What if instead of fighting each other, the Altarians and Corvins settled their territorial dispute through a dance competition? Lisa raised an eyebrow. A dance competition? Why not? They're both down there eating burgers and having fun. Maybe they're in the mood for something different. Before Lisa could answer, Maria was already broadcasting on the General Communication Channel. Attention Altarian and Corvan forces. We've noticed you both want to control the same command center. Instead of fighting, how about we settle this with a friendly dance-off? Winner takes the base. The response was immediate and confused. Did she say dance-off? Came a voice from the Corvan channel. What is a dance-off? Asked an Altarian commander. Maria smiled. It's simple. Each team picks their best dancer. They perform in front of everyone. The crowd decides who wins. No weapons, no casualties, just pure skill and entertainment. There was a long pause as the alien commanders tried to process this suggestion. This is highly irregular, the Corvan captain finally said. But interesting, admitted the Altarian commander. Down on the planet, word of the proposed dance competition was spreading through the crowd at Amy's barbecue. Civilians and soldiers from multiple species were gathering around to watch. Some were even offering to be judges. Admiral Vexvar was watching all of this from his command station with growing amazement. In 300 years of war games, nothing like this had ever happened. The humans had turned a military invasion into some kind of festival. Sir, his communications officer said, the Corvan and Altarian commanders are actually agreeing to this dance competition. They're what? Admiral Vexvar's 4 eyes focused on the display screen. Sure enough, both alien commanders were accepting Maria's challenge. The Corvan captain was selecting what he called his most rhythmically capable soldier. The Altarian commander was consulting with his troops about something called traditional victory dances. This is not how military exercises are supposed to work, Admiral Vexvar muttered. But even as he said it, he found himself curious about the outcome. He had never seen a dance-off before, either. The competition took place in the main square of the simulated city. Hundreds of beings from multiple species gathered to watch. The Corvan dancer moved like a tree in the wind, slow and graceful. The Altarian dancer used all 4 eye stalks independently, creating a hypnotic pattern that was genuinely impressive. The crowd loved both performances. There was applause, cheering, and what sounded like several different species' versions of laughter. News of the humans' unusual victory spread through the galactic military networks faster than anyone expected. Within hours, every major fleet commander in the galaxy had received reports about the barbecue invasion and the dance-off diplomacy. Most of them didn't believe the reports were real. Admiral Vexvar spent 3 days writing his official summary of the first war game. He rewrote it 7 times, trying to find words that would make sense to the Galactic Military Commission. How do you explain that a species won a military exercise by throwing a party? The human approach was unconventional, he finally wrote. Their tactics showed creativity and adaptability, though they deviated significantly from established military doctrine. The Commission's response was swift and clear. The second war game would be designed specifically to counter human unpredictability. No civilians, no planets, no opportunities for social interaction. Just a straightforward space battle between ships, with strict rules of engagement. Captain Lisa Rodriguez read the new scenario briefing with interest. They want predictable, she told her crew during their morning meeting. A simple ship-to-ship combat exercise. No tricks, no distractions. Jake Peterson, who had been promoted to lieutenant colonel after his successful balloon operation, was studying the technical specifications. They've really thought this through. No neutral zones, no civilian targets, no room for creative interpretation. They're trying to force us to fight like everyone else, Maria Santos observed. Traditional space combat by the book. Lieutenant Ben Carter, their tactical officer, had been unusually quiet during the briefing. He was a thin man with glasses, who rarely spoke up in meetings, but when he did, his ideas were always worth hearing. Captain, Ben said slowly, What if we give them exactly what they want? What do you mean? Lisa asked. They want a traditional space battle, so we give them one. But we make it the most entertaining traditional space battle in galactic history. Ben had been working on something he called Project Surprise Party for the past month. He had been studying alien psychology and communication patterns, trying to understand what made different species tick. The thing is, Ben explained, they're expecting us to be unpredictable again. They've prepared for tricks and surprises. But what if our surprise is that we're going to fight completely normally, except we're going to do it in the most human way possible? Lisa was intrigued. Go on. Well, humans have always been storytellers. We turn everything into a narrative. What if we turn this space battle into a story? With characters, plot, and entertainment value? Jake was grinning already. You want to put on a show. Exactly. We'll follow all the rules, use standard tactics, but we'll present it like it's the galaxy's most exciting entertainment program. The second war game was scheduled for the following week. This time, only 12 species participated. 5 had withdrawn after the first game, claiming they needed to reassess their tactical approaches. The remaining participants were either too proud to quit or too curious to stay away. The U.E.'s Freedom faced off against 2 of the largest warships in the participating fleets. The Corvin dreadnought was 3 times the size of the human ship and had enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The Altarian battlecruiser was covered in energy shields that could deflect almost any weapon dot as the 3 ships took their positions. Admiral Vexver settled in to watch what he hoped would be a more conventional military exercise. Instead, the human ship began broadcasting what appeared to be a television program. Good morning, Galaxy, and welcome to Cooking Under Fire, the only show that combines space combat with delicious recipes, announced Chief Petty Officer Nancy Price. She was standing in what looked like a kitchen, wearing a chef's hat and a bright red apron. I'm your host, Nancy, and today we're going to show you how to prepare the perfect space meal while defending yourself from hostile aliens. Admiral Vexver's eye stalks drooped in defeat. They're doing it again. On the screen, Nancy was cheerfully explaining her recipe for emergency rations with style, while the ship's weapon systems could be seen in the background. Now, the key to good space cooking is timing. You want to start your preparation just as the enemy ships begin their attack run. The Corvin and Altarian commanders were trying to ignore the broadcast and focus on their battle plans. But their crews were getting distracted. Several alien officers were actually taking notes on Nancy's cooking tips. The first step, Nancy continued, is to gather your ingredients. We're going to need some basic supplies and a good source of heat. She gestured toward the screen, where Jake Peterson could be seen loading what appeared to be cooking equipment into the ship's weapons systems. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson is going to help us demonstrate the proper use of high-temperature cooking tools, Nancy explained as Jake waved at the camera. Now, some people call these military-grade flamethrowers, but we prefer to think of them as space barbecue equipment. The Corvin captain, Veltar, was watching the broadcast with growing confusion. Are they actually planning to cook during battle? His tactical officer was equally puzzled. It appears so, sir. Though I'm not sure why they would broadcast their food preparation methods to enemy ships. Because, Nancy said on the screen, as if she could hear their conversation, cooking is about sharing. Food brings people together, even in the middle of a space battle. The fighting began with a traditional exchange of weapons fire. The Corvin ship launched a spread of photon torpedoes. The Altarian vessel activated its energy cannons. The human ship responded with what looked like standard defensive maneuvers, but the humans were still broadcasting their cooking show. Oh, perfect timing, Nancy said as the ship shook from an enemy hit. That explosion just preheated our cooking area to exactly the right temperature. Now we can start preparing our alien-friendly vegetable medley. Jake Peterson appeared on screen again, this time wearing protective gear and carrying what was definitely a flamethrower. The key to good space barbecue, he explained, is controlling your heat source. Too little heat and your food won't cook properly. Too much heat and you'll burn everything. He demonstrated by firing the flamethrower out into space, creating a spectacular burst of flame that looked like a weapon discharge, but was actually just Jake showing off his cooking technique. Beautiful, Nancy commented. And notice how the flame pattern creates an attractive visual display. Presentation is just as important as taste. The alien commanders were trying to maintain their attack formations, but their crews were becoming increasingly interested in the cooking demonstration. The Corvin officers were discussing the practical applications of flame cooking in zero gravity. The Altarian crew was debating whether their species could digest the vegetables Nancy was preparing. Meanwhile, the UE's Freedom was fighting back with what appeared to be standard space combat tactics. They launched missiles, fired energy weapons, and maneuvered to avoid enemy fire. But everything they did was being presented as part of the cooking show. Now we're going to add some spice to our recipe, Nancy announced as the human ship fired a spread of missiles at the Corvin vessel. These little flavor enhancers will really wake up your taste buds. The missiles struck the Corvin ship's shields, creating colorful explosions. Look at that beautiful color pattern, Nancy said admiringly. That's what happens when you properly balance your seasoning. Jake Peterson was now demonstrating advanced cooking techniques by using the ship's flamethrowers to create what he called decorative flame patterns in space. The patterns were actually a sophisticated form of electronic warfare designed to interfere with enemy sensors, but they looked like an elaborate light show. The trick, Jake explained, is to create a visual spectacle that's both beautiful and functional. Your guests should be entertained while you're preparing their meal. The Altarian commander was trying to target the human ship, but his weapons systems were having trouble locking on to their target. The decorative flame patterns were creating too much interference. Sir, his tactical officer reported, our sensors are being disrupted by some kind of metallic particles in those flame bursts. Metallic particles? The commander asked. It appears to be glitter, sir. Nancy was now explaining the final steps of her recipe. The last ingredient is presentation. You want your meal to look as good as it tastes. That's why we're adding these festive sparkles to everything. The festive sparkles were actually chaff designed to confuse enemy targeting systems, but they did make the space battle look remarkably pretty. The area around all three ships was filled with glittering particles that caught the light from Xian. Nearby stars Maria Santos was monitoring communications from both enemy ships. Captain, she reported, I'm picking up chatter from the Corvin crew. They're asking if we're actually going to serve the food we're preparing. What should I tell them? Lisa asked. Tell them they're invited to dinner after the battle, Maria suggested, if they're still interested. The battle continued for another hour, with the humans maintaining their cooking show commentary throughout. Nancy provided helpful tips on combat cuisine, while Jake demonstrated increasingly creative uses for military equipment in food preparation. The climax came when the human ship launched what appeared to be a final, desperate attack. After the Second War game, the Galactic Military Commission held an emergency meeting that lasted for 3 days. The transcript of that meeting was classified, but rumors spread throughout the galaxy about heated arguments, confused admirals, and at least one request for psychological evaluation of the entire human species. By the time the Third War game was announced, participation had dropped dramatically. 17 species had started the games. Only 8 signed up for the third round. The rest had quietly withdrawn, citing various reasons like scheduling conflicts and strategic reassessment periods. The 5 species that dropped out after The space barbecue incident were more honest. They admitted they had no idea how to compete against an opponent that treated warfare like a social event. Admiral Vexvar was determined to create a scenario that would force the humans to behave like normal military forces. Urban warfare, he announced during the briefing. Close quarters combat in a simulated city environment. No space for elaborate setups. No room for cooking shows. Just soldiers, weapons, and tactical skill. Major Tim Johnson had replaced Captain Rodriguez for this ground-based exercise. He was a veteran of Earth's military who had volunteered specifically to see what all the fuss was about. Standing beside him were Sergeant Carol Davis, a communications specialist who could make friends with anyone, and Corporal Alex Wright, who had the unusual hobby of collecting alien art and crafts. This should be interesting, Tim said as he reviewed the mission parameters. Standard urban combat scenario. Capture and hold key positions. Eliminate enemy forces. No civilians to complicate things. Carol was studying the city layout on her tablet. You know, this looks like a perfect place for community activities. Community activities? Alex asked. Sure. Look at all these open spaces. The central plaza would be great for gatherings. Those buildings could host events. This place just needs some organization. Tim was beginning to understand why humans kept winning these games. They didn't see military exercises. They saw opportunities, the other. Participating species took their positions around the simulated city with serious military precision. The Corvan forces established standard perimeter control. The Altarian units deployed in textbook formation. The remaining alien species followed, centuries-old tactics for urban warfare. The humans set up what appeared to be a radio station. Good. Morning, everyone, and welcome to Extreme Urban Makeover, Military Edition, Carol announced over the general communications frequency. I'm your host, Carol Davis, and today we're going to transform this boring old city into the most exciting place in the galaxy. The alien commanders initially tried to ignore the broadcast, but their soldiers were curious. After 2 previous encounters with human entertainment, everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Now, I know what you're thinking. Carol continued. How can we improve urban spaces while conducting necessary military operations? Well, that's where teamwork comes in. We're going to turn this whole exercise into a friendly competition. Tim and Alex were already moving through the city, but they weren't advancing like normal soldiers. They were walking around with clipboards, taking notes, and occasionally stopping to examine buildings and street layouts. The key to successful urban development, Carol explained, is getting input from all the different groups who will be using the space. That's why we're inviting everyone to participate in our improvement project. A group of Corvan soldiers was approaching one of the strategic buildings when Tim stepped out to meet them. Instead of raising his weapon, he held up his clipboard. Excuse me, Tim said politely, but would you mind answering a few questions about urban planning? We're conducting a survey. The Corvan squad leader stopped, confused. A survey? Yes. We're trying to understand how different species prefer to organize their living spaces. For example, do Corvans like open areas or more enclosed environments? The squad leader looked around at his soldiers, who were all listening with interest. Corvans were tree-like beings who spent most of their lives in forest environments. They question about spatial preferences was actually quite thoughtful. We prefer areas with natural growth patterns, the squad leader admitted. Excellent, Tim said, making notes. And what about recreational facilities? Do your people enjoy group activities? While Tim was conducting his survey, Alex Wright was busy with his own part of the plan. He had set up what appeared to be an art supply station in the central plaza. Paints, brushes, decorating materials, and various craft supplies were arranged on several tables. Attention all participants, Alex announced over the radio. "We're starting the creative improvement portion of our urban makeover project. Each team gets to decorate one building in their cultural style. Prizes will be awarded for creativity, teamwork, and cultural authenticity." The response was immediate and surprising. Several alien soldiers abandoned their tactical positions to come. "Look at the art supplies." A group of crystal beings from the Nexus Coalition was particularly interested in the metallic paints that would complement their natural luminescence. "This is not standard military procedure," the Altarian commander reported to Admiral Vexvar. "I'm aware of that," the admiral replied wearily. "What exactly are they doing now?" "They appear to be redecorating the city, sir, with help from our troops." Admiral Vexvar watched his tactical display as military units from multiple species converged on what should have been strategic positions. Instead of fighting for control of buildings, they were painting murals on the walls. Carl Davis was providing commentary like a television host. "Look at that beautiful work by the Corvin team. Notice how they've incorporated natural vine patterns into their design. And over here, the Altarians are creating a stunning geometric pattern that really showcases their mathematical thinking." The competition was becoming genuinely engaging. Each species wanted to demonstrate their cultural artistry, and the art supplies were surprisingly good quality. Alex had spent weeks researching what materials would work best for different alien physiologies. "The Zephyrian team is really showing off their aerial perspective skills," Carl continued. "And I love how the crystal beings are using those reflective paints to create patterns that change color in different lighting." Meanwhile, Tim Johnson was making his way systematically through the city. His urban planning survey was actually an intelligence-gathering operation. By asking friendly questions about spatial preferences and community needs, he was learning detailed information about each species' tactical thinking and cultural priorities. But the aliens were enjoying the conversations. Many of them had never been asked about their opinions on city design or community organization. The questions made them think about their own societies in new ways. "Do your people prefer to live in groups or individually?" Tim asked a team of Altarian soldiers. "Groups," their leader replied immediately. "We are social beings. Isolation is unpleasant for us." "That's very interesting," Tim said, making notes. "And how do you handle disagreements within groups?" "We discuss until consensus is reached," the Altarian explained. "All voices must be heard. What if you can't reach consensus?" The Altarian thought about this. "Then we find a different approach that works for everyone." Tim smiled. "That sounds like a very wise system." These conversations were happening all over the city. Humans were talking to aliens about culture, society, and community organization. The aliens were discovering that humans were genuinely interested in learning about other species, not just defeating them. The turning point came when Carol announced the next phase of the competition. "Now that everyone has decorated their buildings beautifully, it's time for the Community Organization Challenge. Each team needs to demonstrate how they would solve a common urban problem." She explained the scenario. "There's been a disagreement between two groups about how to use the central plaza. One group wants it for quiet reflection. The other wants it for active recreation. How would you resolve this conflict?" This was actually a real tactical problem. The central plaza was the key strategic position in the urban warfare scenario. Whoever controlled it would win the exercise. But Carol had presented it as a community mediation challenge. The different alien species began discussing solutions. The Corvins suggested dividing the plaza by time, with quiet hours and active hours. The Altarians proposed creating separate zones for different activities. The crystal beings offered to provide lighting that could change the mood of the space throughout the day. As the discussions continued, something remarkable happened. The different species began working together instead of competing against each other. They were solving the plaza problem as a joint effort rather than fighting over territory. Tim Johnson was watching all of this from his position near the central plaza. While everyone was focused on community problem solving, he had quietly positioned himself and his team at the key tactical points throughout the city. The humans now controlled every strategic building, but they had done it so smoothly that no one had noticed. "This is actually quite impressive," the Corvin commander told Carol during one of the planning discussions. "Your species has a talent for bringing others together." "That's the point," Carol replied. "Why fight over resources when you can share them?" By the time the fifth war game was announced, word had spread throughout the entire galaxy about the humans and their unusual approach to military exercises. Some species called them brilliant, others called them dangerous. Most just called them confusing. Only 3 species remained willing to participate: the humans, the Altarians, and the Corvins. The other 14 had found various polite ways to excuse themselves from what had become less of a military exercise and more of an unpredictable social experiment. Admiral Vexfer had spent months designing this final scenario. He was determined to create a situation where humans would have to fight like normal military forces. No civilians, no planets, no opportunities for community building or art projects. Simple ship-to-ship combat, he announced during the final briefing. 3 vessels, last ship operational wins. Direct confrontation only. No tricks, no distractions, no cooking shows. The rules were stricter than ever before. No broadcasting except for official military communications. No launching of non-weapon objects. No attempts to board enemy vessels. Just pure, traditional space combat until one ship remained functional. Captain Lisa Rodriguez was back in command of the UES Freedom for this final game. The ship had been upgraded since the first exercise, but it was still much smaller than the Altarian battlecruiser or the Corvin dreadnought. "So," she said to her assembled crew, "they want us to fight fair and square. No tricks, no entertainment, no friendship making." Jake Peterson, now Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, was studying the technical specifications with a wide grin. "You know what this means, don't you?" "What?" Maria Santos asked. "They've finally given us the perfect setup for the ultimate cooking show." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure that?" "Think about it," Jake explained. "We're stuck in our ship, with no outside contact. We can't leave, we can't invite anyone over, and we have to use only our weapon systems. It's like being trapped in a kitchen with limited ingredients and having to create a masterpiece." Lieutenant Colonel Peterson had been developing what he called advanced culinary combat techniques during the months between games. He had convinced the ship's engineers to modify their weapon systems so they could serve double duty as cooking equipment. "The flamethrowers we installed for the last game worked perfectly as space barbecue equipment," Jake continued. "And I've been experimenting with using photon torpedoes as high-temperature cooking chambers." Maria was monitoring the communication channels as the 3 ships took their positions. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "the rules say we can't broadcast entertainment programs. But they don't say anything about educational content." "What kind of educational content?" Lisa asked. "Well, what if we taught a class on human culture? That's educational, right? And food is a big part of culture." Chief Petty Officer Nancy Price had been promoted to Lieutenant Commander after her successful hosting of the space cooking show. She was already setting up what appeared to be a classroom in the ship's main conference room. "I've been thinking about this," Nancy said. "Every species in the galaxy has some form of food preparation, but they've never seen human techniques. We could be providing a valuable cultural exchange service." The battle began exactly as Admiral Vexfer had planned. The 3 ships faced off in open space, with no distractions and no complications. The Corvin dreadnought immediately began firing its massive weapons. The Altarian cruiser activated its energy shields and responded with precise laser bursts. The human ship appeared to take a defensive position and began broadcasting what sounded like a university lecture. "Welcome to Introduction to Human Cultural Studies," Nancy announced in her most professional voice. "I'm Professor Nancy Price, and today we'll be exploring the role of food in human society and its applications in high-stress environments." Admiral Dexver sighed deeply. They're doing it again. But this time was different. Nancy's presentation was genuinely educational. She discussed the history of human cooking, the social importance of shared meals, and the psychological benefits of food preparation during difficult times. "One interesting aspect of human culture," Nancy explained, "is our tendency to maintain normal activities, even during extreme circumstances. For example, human soldiers throughout history have continued cooking and sharing meals even during active combat situations." The lecture was actually fascinating. The Corvin and Altarian crews found themselves learning things about human psychology and culture that they had never considered before. Meanwhile, the space battle was continuing around them. The UE's Freedom was fighting back against the two larger ships, but their weapons' fire seemed different somehow. Instead of random defensive shots, their attacks were creating patterns in space. "Notice how we're using our defensive systems to create these flame patterns," Nancy said, as Jake's flamethrowers lit up the space around their ship. "This serves both a practical purpose and an aesthetic one. The patterns help with morale while also providing tactical advantages." The flame patterns were indeed beautiful, but they were also sophisticated electronic countermeasures designed to confuse enemy targeting systems. Jake had perfected the technique of making military tactics look like art forms. "Now we're going to demonstrate advanced temperature control," Nancy continued, as the ship fired what appeared to be photon torpedoes at both enemy vessels. "These specialized heating units allow for precise cooking even in zero-gravity environments." The heating units were definitely photon torpedoes, but they were set to create controlled explosions that generated specific heat patterns rather than maximum damage. The explosions looked like elaborate fireworks displays. Captain Veltar of the Corvin dreadnought was trying to maintain his attack formation, but his crew was becoming increasingly distracted by the human presentation. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "our weapons are having difficulty targeting through those flame patterns. And our crew keeps asking questions about human cooking techniques." His communications officer added the Altarian commander was having similar problems. His sophisticated targeting systems were being disrupted by what appeared to be decorative light shows, while his crew was taking notes on human cultural practices. "This is supposed to be a military exercise," the Altarian captain muttered, but even he had to admit that Nancy's lecture was genuinely interesting. She was explaining how humans used food and social activities to maintain group morale during stressful situations, and it was actually quite relevant to military operations. The turning point came when Jake Peterson appeared on the broadcast to demonstrate what he called emergency cooking techniques for space environments. "The key to successful cooking during combat," Jake explained while operating what was clearly a military flamethrower, "is adaptability. You have to work with whatever tools you have available." He showed how to use the ship's weapon systems as cooking equipment, how to prepare meals during high-stress situations, and how to maintain proper nutrition even when under attack. "For example," Jake said, "if you're surrounded by hostile forces and need to prepare food quickly, you can use controlled explosions to create cooking heat." He demonstrated by firing several modified torpedoes that created spectacular bursts of controlled flame around the enemy ships. The explosions were beautiful, perfectly safe, and completely non-threatening. But they also deployed thousands of tiny metallic particles that were now floating around both enemy vessels. The important thing, Jake continued, is presentation. Even emergency rations should look appetizing. He activated the ship's main flamethrower system, creating an elaborate pattern of flames that spelled out, "Dinner is served," in letters visible from both enemy ships. The metallic particles suddenly activated, connecting to form what appeared to be an enormous dining table floating in space between all three ships. The table was complete with chairs, place settings, and what looked like a full buffet setup. Both enemy commanders stared at their tactical displays in amazement. Somehow, while they were busy fighting, the humans had constructed the galaxy's largest space restaurant around them. How did they ... Captain Veltar began. The cooking demonstration, his tactical officer explained. Those flame patterns and controlled explosions were deploying the construction materials. We've been watching them build this thing for the past hour. The space table was connected to all three ships by the same type of cable system the humans had used in previous games. Moving away would damage the setup, and attacking would destroy what was clearly meant to be a peace offering. "Attention all participants," Nancy announced. "Class is now over, and it's time for the practical examination. You're all invited to join us for a graduation dinner where we'll demonstrate everything we've learned about cross-cultural food sharing." Maria Santos was already broadcasting dinner invitations to both enemy ships. "We've prepared a variety of dishes suitable for different species," she announced. "Plus, we have some new recipes we developed specifically for this occasion using advanced space cooking techniques." Admiral Vexfer was watching the tactical display with a mixture of admiration and defeat.